So welcome everyone. I'm Kristen Morose. I'm one of the GreenStep City's co-directors. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, I think we have a few new faces joining us today. We are a program that challenges Minnesota communities, assists them with taking action and recognizes them for their action around sustainability. And we're celebrating 10 years this year, so we are very excited for all of the communities that are in the program and really seeing where the next 10 years takes us. Is the PowerPoint showing? Can anyone confirm that for me?
Yes, it sure is.
Okay, thank you. We're gonna start off today with what we call random breakout rooms. So you're gonna randomly be assigned with a few other individuals. This gives an opportunity, since we have quite a few on the call today, an opportunity for you to introduce yourself, get to know someone new, hopefully. So talk about who you are, who you're with, what you work on, and maybe what does cultural or behavior change mean to you? Why are you interested in this workshop? And then we'll automatically pull you all back into this larger group. So Maggie behind the scenes is gonna set that up. You'll get a little prompt to let you know, and you can click on it or it'll automatically pull you into a room. And we'll see you back here shortly. Everyone in meeting. Does anyone know on Zoom, is there a way to message? I think Maggie had the controls to message people in breakout rooms. I do not.
Let me check that.
Maggie, it looks like you have co-host now.
Not totally sure, to tell you the truth.
Okay. Is there a way that you can message people in the breakout rooms?
I hope so. I'm trying to figure that out.
Okay.
It's weird.
Stop sharing while we try to figure this out. And if anyone is a Zoom expert, feel free to chime in.
Kristen, Lissa just called me, and apparently she has the power to close out all the rooms currently. And so we're trying to do that, and hopefully folks will be with us shortly. Apologies for the technical glitches.
Sorry, all of a sudden I was like, wait, what's this notification? Why is it asking me this question? Okay, here we go.
All right, we're seeing some people jump back in. Sorry about the technical difficulties, everyone. I hope you had a good long conversation. It was supposed to be 5 minutes. I think you got a little bit more, some of you. And Alexis was trapped in a room, and she's our next presenter, so.
Well, luckily we left our room because someone who plays trivia knew that we could all hit leave room and come back to the main room without being forced to do it. And so we all decided to take the plunge together and hit the leave room button. And voila, we're here.
Very good. All right, I will present my screen now, and then we're gonna have Alexis jump into her presentation.
Hello, everybody. So I am Alexis, and I'm the Behavioral Science and Evaluation Manager with CERT's Clean Energy Resource Teams. And we connect individuals and their communities to resources they need to implement clean energy. And for us, clean energy is energy efficiency and renewable energy and electric vehicles and things like that. So today, a lot of my examples are going to come from the energy world, but just know that they're translatable. You can totally do it with, waste and biking and other topics within the environment and sustainability world. We're a statewide partnership of 4 organizations, and we work across the state in these 7 regions. So if you're newer to GreenStep, there's a regional coordinator for certs assigned to each of these 7 regions that you can connect with and go deeper on clean energy projects with almost like your own personal regional concierge. So feel free to tap into that resource. And today, next slide, we're going to be tapping into behavioral science frameworks to spur action. So first I'll cover some of those. Then I'll share with you the behavior change program design that CERTS uses, like the process we use to create our programming. I'll talk a little bit about small business blitzes because those are going to be talked about even more later. And then Falcon Heights example of reaching residents. Next slide, please. For behavioral science, this you might get even more depth of the why of behavioral science and psychology of sustainability from the next speaker, but this is my little cliff notes on it. We're basically applying concepts from social science and psychology fields. Even marketing too runs parallel with this field to really understand why we do or don't take action on things. We have learned pretty well that information alone is not effective. Just supplying people with info doesn't create behavior change. And then there's this other understanding that humans act in their economic self-interest. We want to believe that we're calculating, rational thinking human beings, and we are not. We're actually quite impulsive, and we act on convenience and emotion. And so that's what brings us to the world of behavioral science. Next slide, please. We've got these 4 models generally that I pull from, and I'm going to go into depth on a couple of them just for examples, and then we'll go into even more depth on the one in the upper left, community-based social marketing, which is what I base kind of CERTS's program design process on, and then I draw from these other fields. Next slide. So the Fogg behavior model, this comes from a professor at Stanford University, and it's this combination that you get BMAP, you get behavior change when you have motivation, ability, and a prompt occurring or converging at the same moment. If behavior change isn't happening, one of those things is missing. And motivation and ability can be traded off. So you can get away with having less ability to do something if you have a lot of motivation to do it, but yet you still need a prompt. And the image on the right shows the different types of prompts, or in my case, I'll be talking about later, strategies you can apply to encourage behavior change. So if you've got high motivation, low ability, you just need kind of a facilitator to nudge you along. If you have low motivation and high ability, you might need something more like a spark, just a quick little igniter to get you going, because that's what you need is the motivation, not the ability, and so on. So those are just a little bit of framework we draw from. Next slide. This other one is Social Change 2.0, and there's a lot to it, and these are the 2 pieces I've really pulled out and drawn from in our work. So I wanted to share those with you. This is with David Gershon in California. And the 4 key questions on the left can be really useful for kind of thinking about what an individual needs to know to take action. So if you're developing educational resources, those might be good questions to consider. And then the image on the right is showing kind of a process that you can take to go from just simply disseminating information to empowerment of action. So I'm going to walk you through an example. Next slide. For lighting with CERTS, we have our tried and true right light guide for helping people adopt energy efficient lighting. And now it's become more, luckily, mainstream, like everybody is buying LEDs and they know about them. But back when we developed this guide, we were following these 4 steps. So like, where do I start? Well, you pick up a Right Light guide and start learning about your lighting options. What are the important actions? We shaped the guide so that it's got this easy stepwise approach for the actions they need to think about. And you can see how each of the steps starts with a verb: decide something, think, find. How do I do them? We're walking them through the basics of how to look at a lighting facts label and choose Energy Star. And if I do them, what impact will it make? We're showing them their dollars and cents and the pros and cons of adopting different lighting. So that's the one piece of Gershon I wanted to explain. Next slide. And then the next one is about using that Social Change 2.0, where when CERTS was simply disseminating Right Light guides, we were lucky in a year to get 250 downloads off our website and maybe 3,000 guides handed out at the state fair and other events throughout the year. Then we're like, hey, let's collaborate with utilities. We welcomed them to co-brand the guide with their own logos and distribute them to their customers. And that had us reaching over 120,000 Minnesotans every year. From there, we went into an innovate mode where we developed the Right Light app, which is a mobile-friendly website basically, but it acted like a decision tree app. And it's still available today. Hop on and pick out some new lighting for yourself. And then we moved down into empowerment zone, where we came up with it's now a 3 or 4 year standing, 3-year standing campaign called Saving Watts and Drops. It's a framework we use to help cities and other community organizations. Even like manufactured home parks is another group we've been doing quite a bit of this work with, where we help them distribute these easy plug and play items to their community members with our assistance. And talk about scaling up the impact, Next slide. So just to keep you in the here and now of kind of what's happening with CERTS, we do have our next kind of foray into this world where we might apply some Social Change 2.0 and an educational guide is with our air source heat pumps. So you might want to check that out and just see about air source heat pumps. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail. So next slide. So again, drawing from these 4 frameworks, I've kind of boiled it down into, next slide, a 3-step process for behavior change program design, where in the first step, we're looking at the audience and the behavior together. And that's pretty key, because the audience can influence the behavior and the behavior could influence the audience. So it kind of depends on what you're after, and it's iterative. You might kind of go down one path with an audience, look at some behaviors, decide to either switch audience, and there's so much work to be done. The point is you got to kind of start to focus in on something to be effective. And I'll talk about that more in a minute, but you do want to kind of look at those together in step 1. Then in step 2, you look at the barriers and the benefits to that specific audience engaging in that specific behavior. And that is what will lead you to being able to apply effective strategies. So next slide, I've taken the process and I have created a couple of resources, and Chris Meyer, my colleague, is going to drop them in the chat for you, 2 PDFs. One is a worksheet that can walk you through, how to apply what I'm about to tell you to your own programming or ideas. And then the other one is a sheet of definitions of all the strategies that require a little more defining, so that you kind of have a better understanding of what the strategies are. Next slide. So first we'll take a look at step 1, audience and behavior. Next slide. For audiences, if your effort is designed for all audiences, it may not be effective for any one audience. So unfortunately, that can be true for a lot of things, but it can especially be true for behavior change. And then you might want to think about how to define your audience. Do you want to do that in terms of demographics, a geographic area, maybe some shared circumstances or challenges or obstacles, and kind of provide a behavioral solution to that shared circumstance? And then how do you want to access your audience? We suggest doing it in community, where they live, work, or play, where they already are. And meeting people where they are is kind of twofold, both kind of spatially in the world, but also kind of mentally. So like if they're early on and a newbie for the behavior you're trying to change, kind of meet them where they are in that newbie stage and bring them along so that nobody's left out. Also, you want to be cognizant of subgroups with your audience. So you might be able to arrive at more relevant messaging if you think of subgroups. So we can kind of keep that in mind. And then tailored actions. Again, the behavior and the audience go together. So being able to know your audience and arrive at more tailored actions for them. Next slide. For behavior, there's a couple things to keep in mind for this. And I realize as I talk about this slide in general on behavior, it feels like, this is a lot to ask, how do I do it all? And I just want you to know, like, it's not a perfect process, just, keep these things in mind. These are considerations. But so with behavior, you're going to be thinking, well, is this a one-time behavior, like replacing my light bulbs at my home with LED? Repeat kind of behavior, like turn off the TV when no one is watching. And you just want to be aware of that so that as you move forward in the process, what kind of barriers and benefits you might have to those types of behaviors. Non-divisible, this is just as you're designing the program or effort, you would want to make sure you're not trying to tackle two behaviors at the same time that are really different from each other. So sometimes it's helpful to pair behaviors if they're really similar and have no difference in their barriers and benefits, but that's hardly the case. So an example here is people often will say, air seal and insulate your homes. Well, air sealing is sealing up the leaks and insulating is adding, fluffy insulation, and they have two really different barriers and benefits actually. And so while they seem to go together, they need different behaviors to get to the impact, which is this end state. So this end state behavior is thinking about, well, what actually results in the impact I'm looking for? So in this example of lighting, someone could, ultimately, we want them saving energy. That's the impact, right? And so to do that, that light bulb needs to be screwed into that light fixture to have the energy savings happening. But there's these steps that happen beforehand. Learning about lighting, remembering to put it on your shopping list and actually pick it up at the store, bringing it home and installing it. So that's the idea of a behavioral chain, that sometimes there are steps along the way that you need to be cognizant of as well. Next slide. And if you have a lot of behaviors to choose from, you can work through a process like this for behavioral selection. Basically, you're putting a lot of different criteria, or in this case, 3 criteria, together to pick a single action of multiple actions. And you'll see it more clearly in the next slide, but you're looking at the proportion of people maybe not doing it. So that's your opportunity of who could do the behavior. Your impact in our world, clean energy, that would be the energy savings or generation, and the likelihood of taking action might be arrived at through survey work or asking people. Next slide. And so if you have a lot of different actions, you can set up a numerical table like this and assign numerical values to each of those criteria: opportunity, impact, probability. This is where I'm thinking equity could be layered in. You could have another column in here that's about, equity and assign some sort of numerical value to that. And in the end, you're just using these numbers to get you in the ballpark. The second to last column, relative score or weight, is a multiplication of the numbers, and you end up with this unitless value that you're just looking at the order of magnitude. And then you're ranking those to kind of start to see what bubbles up as kind of the most, the action that you might want to work on first. Like I said, there's lots of work to be done. You might get to numbers ranked 2 and 3 actions further down the road, but we all have limited time and resources. So this is a way to kind of start to filter out what to work on first. Next slide. So in step 2, we take what we've done with audience and behavior and go into step 2 for assessing the barriers and benefits of those. Next slide. And this is a step that seems like you people want to skip, right? You want to get right to strategies like, okay, we got our behavior, we got our audience. Let's just figure out what to do with these people. But this part is so critical that you actually select effective strategies. And so you might arrive at understanding your barriers and benefits through research, observing your target audience, conducting focus group conversations or surveys. And really, when we're trying to encourage a specific behavior, we're trying to lower any barriers they have and increase the benefits to engaging that behavior. And the opposite is true for discouraging a specific behavior. Next slide. And again, I said, I understand how time and budgets can be limited. And so this is a very easy couple questions, 4 questions to keep in mind when you want to assess your barriers and benefits and don't have a lot of time or money. So if you do nothing, or minimum, do this. And that is just go out and ask even a handful of people from your audience. What prevents you from engaging in this behavior? What do you find challenging about it? What do you perceive even as the benefit of engaging in this behavior? What do you like about it? And this with barriers and benefits too, you have to think about to your audience, to the individual. So unfortunately, we all like this work because it has benefits, societal benefits, but sometimes the individual doesn't always see that as a benefit for themselves. And so that's going to be a sticking point in the design of your effort. You really need to think about the barriers and the benefits to the individual or organization taking action. So once you've got your barriers and benefits understood, next slide, you can go into step 3 with strategies. And next slide, the first test will be using work from Professor Schultz, and you'll now have a sense if you have really high barriers or low barriers, high benefits or low benefits, and you'll be able to pick a strategy from this quadrant based on that weighting. And then next slide, you would stack on additional strategies like the one shown that would, add to the recipe of your behavior change program. So next slide, I'm just going to explain that, give a couple examples of those strategies for the small business blitz that you'll hear about more later. This is where we would coordinate with communities and go door to door to businesses to tell them about utility rebate programs or even free energy assessments. Sometimes we would bring freebies like 4-foot LED lamps in and out of businesses on a windy day. I tell you, it's loads of fun. So this one relies on this Robert Cialdini's key areas of influence, and liking is one of them. So just basically like being a friendly face that comes in with some good news, some information, and, how can they turn us away, So we're relying on that to kind of win their time and attention for a few minutes. We're coming in with communication and education about the program. So, just a little bit of education to add in there. We're making it convenient. So we might be asking them to sign up for a free energy assessment right on the spot. That way it's done, no follow-up phone call. And we might be doing that for the next week or in 2 weeks, and we're focusing it on that whole community. So we're kind of, encouraging them to kind of act sooner than later. And then there's this bit about reciprocity. So they're getting these free lamps or free energy assessments. And then humans, when we are given something, we want to give back. So that might lend itself to them wanting to act in the future and take that, goodwill, offer from the utility to be like, maybe I should do something with my energy, So that's an example of small businesses. And I saw a chat that came in. Go ahead and to next slide, Kristen, that I should have spoken about. I think Leslie talked about social modeling and social norms, low barrier and low benefits, and why is that? So basically what Leslie's saying is it fell in the lower left quadrant of the barriers and benefits key strategies table. And the reason is those two are actually highly effective at moving behavior change for humans. And really social norming and social modeling, you could add into any behavior change program you're doing because it's so effective. And sorry, I didn't say that. And thanks for bringing it up. And Elise Amel's adding, because people want to belong, that we're social by nature, and that's our nature. So what it means is, like, if you have an action with an audience that's very low barriers and low benefits, maybe all it needs is a little social modeling or social norming to nudge them along to action. That's how effective it can be. So back to Falcon Heights here. We, like I said, went with the Social Change 2.0 model, and we're engaging the Falcon Heights Environment Commission to do their own Saving Watts and Drops effort with their community. They had a philanthropic donation of almost 800 LED light bulbs. And these are just dollar store light bulbs. They had several partners, and they went through 3 distribution modes, and you can see the kind of impact they had with just this work over about a year. Next slide. So their first mode was with multifamily housing. They worked with motivated residents in 3 or 4 apartment units, and they had very cooperative site managers. We borrowed from this pledge concept and created a memorandum of understanding so that the property managers agreed, once they got these 100, 200 light bulbs, that they were actually going to do something with it. So they signed this memorandum of understanding and committed to getting them installed. And then we had our communication and education piece with the residents. This was left in their apartment. Hey, we left you these bulbs, or we installed these bulbs. If you love them, here's where you get more from. This also had the elements of convenience and the follow-up with the apartment managers to make sure it actually got installed. Next slide. The City Hall distribution was promoted in 3 city newsletters over the course of a month and a half. We tried a pledge technique again with the residents, and here we, through the pledge, infused a little goal setting. So we basically said, hey, we're giving you these couple of free bulbs. Can you actually get them installed by the end of this coming weekend? And if you love them, change out your whole house by Earth Day. So that's goal setting sprinkled in. The third one was with public events, just some tabletop signage. This really gets at the whole meeting people where they are. And I think we were at the sustainability fair in Falcon Heights, and even the elementary kids stuff sale. And then the last slide here shows the bulb itself from the dollar store and these item flyers, which are like small educational pieces, and they're about that same size relative to the bulb. And here's where the strategies of authority or social marketing can kind of work in, because the city is doing something. They're kind of modeling, showing like, look, this is something we could do and all of us residents could do. And the last slide just shows some resources you can look into on your own, a free book on community-based social marketing online, and the BEC conference, Behavior and Energy Climate Change Conference, which is greatly reduced price this year because it's all virtual. So it'd be a great opportunity to attend this year if you would like.
Thank you so much, Alexis. I'm not seeing any other questions come in from the chat, so I think let's, for time's sake, move on to Dr. Emil, and we can combine any questions after her presentation if there's anything else out there for Alexis too. I miss being in a room and hearing all the applause, but I know people appreciate what you just shared. So with that, we'll move on to Dr. Emil.
Great, thank you. I appreciate being here. Thank you for inviting me. And I just want to start by saying how wonderful Alexis's presentation has been. It's really beautifully articulated some great frameworks that are very well established empirically, and you've developed a lot of really powerful tools. And so thank you. This is very exciting to see psychology in action. So I will try and not do too much overlap with what Alexis said, but there are a few commonalities. But so I will try and go quickly so we have lots of time for discussion. So next slide, please. So what my colleagues and I like to say is there are no environmental problems, they're really human behavior problems. So it really is at the core of creating more sustainable and regenerative cities, to be addressing humans and our choices and what we think about and our attitudes and that kind of thing. Next slide, please. So it seems like it's taking a long time for people to become sustainable in how they behave. Next slide, please. This is not terribly surprising from a psychological standpoint, because what we tend to do is assume a lot of the things Alexis mentioned, that people just need to pay attention and just do it. Please go forward. Yeah, so one of the areas where we struggle is turning what we know into actual action. So I'll address that in more detail. Secondly, we are asking people as little individuals to work against enormous systems. And this is a big ask that we don't necessarily properly recognize. And then lastly, we ask people to do private things like bringing your own bags and turning off your tap when you're brushing your teeth. And these are important things for people to do, but they are not enough to be able to get us to where we need to be, especially regarding climate change. So next slide, please. You've probably seen a million of these, 15 ways to do, reduce your carbon footprint, or top 10 ways to be a good, planetary citizen. This is great. People do need to know what they could do, but they won't automatically do it, is the first problem we need to address. So next slide, please. This is just a short, truncated list of all of the things that keep us from actually behaving on the things we know about. I'm not going to talk about all of them today. We'll talk a little bit about worldviews and habits, and I may get into some things like values and perceptual limits, but there's just a lot that comes between us acting on what we know. Next slide, please. So the first thing is what we see other people doing, and this goes directly to the chat question earlier. Why is social modeling and social norms powerful? And it really has an evolutionary reason, in that when we were evolving, we evolved successfully in groups. So if you were ostracized from a group, you were likely to die out in the wilderness alone. And so biologically, we're primed to really care about being in those groups. And so it's not something we think about, in fact, when we think, oh, I don't care what other people think. But we do. I mean, the reality is we care deeply about what other people think. And so we will do what we see other people doing. And another form of how norms affect us is if we, as an individual, make a choice, do other people support us for what we're doing? If you get that funny look, likely your body is going to go into what we call fight or flight. You're going to get nervous. You're going to start shaking. You might get flushed, and we don't like to feel like that. It comes along with feelings of embarrassment and anger. And so when people, yeah, I know, like the stink eye is something we don't want to deal with. So it's important that, and we can go to the next slide now. We do two things. One is to celebrate when other people do something sustainable. They need the support to keep going when they're getting the stink eye from somebody else. Another thing is, if you're being courageous and you know you're doing the right thing, be super obvious about it, because it is the thing that creates the norms. When people see a very normal person riding their bike to work, you know, notice the guy in this picture is not in spandex, and I'm not saying that you can't wear spandex when you ride your bike, but wearing spandex means that you're biking for exercise. If you're biking for transportation, you're going to look pretty different. And so the more people see a parent with kids or somebody at the grocery store, or, you know, doing normal things, they will better understand that this is an okay thing for people to do for transportation. Next slide, please. So this is probably the first thing that most people learn about when they're learning about, you know, the psychology that comes with persuasion, is that the words you use really matter. And so a real obvious example is when you know, the polar bear was being used as the reason we should care about climate change. And certainly these charismatic fauna are really important in some respect to people. People love them, they're beautiful, they're iconic, but they don't overcome our concern about our daily affairs. Like if you've got a bill to pay, or you've got you know, a test to take, or you know, you've got a big project due at work, the polar bear is just not going to have the persuasive impact on your choices. So next slide, please. The way to manage this is to listen to people when you're trying to talk to them. And Alexis had talked about a bit about this. Is it's important to understand who you're interacting with. Find what makes them tick. And it sounds like it might be challenging, but frankly, humans have this tendency to think that what's in their own brain is really what's going on in everybody else's brain. And that's not the case. We all have different idiosyncrasies. We all have different experiences. And so it's important not to always say, oh, well, the answer here is obvious, and try and understand the perspective of the people you're talking to. And so when you're talking to people, listen. It's important to listen first, and then choose what they value. People talk about what they value. So if they're talking about their families, then frame your ideas about sustainability in terms of how it affects people's families. And you know, you can do that if they're concerned about the economy, or if they're concerned about their faith. I mean, there's just a lot of things that people value that are, it's not a lie that those things would be affiliated with long-term sustainability. So it's just a matter of bringing those connections to the forefront. Okay, so another factor that comes in between what we know and what we do is that things like, especially like climate change, seem to be psychologically distant. They're far off in time, they're far off in, the impacts are far off in geographic location. They may be happening to people they don't know. And this just keeps the issue of climate change from feeling very important and close. So next slide. It's important to talk about the regional things that are relevant to people. You know, there's a huge cabin culture in Minnesota, and people care that bark beetles are eating their trees. So trout fishermen really care that the lakes are cold enough for trout to survive. So there are ways to connect people with what's really happening locally. Use images, tell stories, ask real neighbors to speak up. But it's really important not to to make people too afraid. You know, fear appeals tend to shut people down so they don't take any action. In fact, they will deny that something exists in order not to feel appended with fear. So, so it's important to tell people that there's an urgent reality, but also to retain some hope that there's stuff we can do. All right, next slide, please. So we all know that what's happening on the planet is changing constantly. It's a dynamic situation. The problems change, the solutions change. It's super hard for people to keep up and know what they're supposed to do. It's kind of like, should we eat eggs or not eat eggs? And, you know, when it seems like every month there's a new medical journal article saying one thing or the other. And it's really not about what any one research project finds. It's about the body of literature as a whole. And so with new information coming out all the time, it's really hard for people to keep track of how their behavior impacts things. Next slide, please. So one thing we can do to try and help people navigate a constantly changing world is to have some heuristics or some decision-making rules that they can keep in mind. So in this slide, I compare a very deeply embedded sort of Western industrial worldview, some assumptions we make about how the world works. So we've, in the United States, been in a place where there have been plenty of resources for generations. It's hard for people to realize that the Earth has a limited capacity to regenerate. So we have to actually transition from the world of plenty to the idea that there are planetary boundaries. When people think about having planetary boundaries, then they can look at each of their decisions and think to themselves, like, what resource is this drawing? And how much of it is available to me, and how much will be available in the future? And then when they ask those questions, they can make better decisions. Another principle that's really deeply embedded in our culture is that we can not know where something comes from and not care where it goes when we're done. So it's called a take, make, waste economy. So this is, our oil-based economy. We drill for oil, we make plastics, and then we toss our plastics. And what we need people to do is think about how natural systems are circular. There's no waste in natural systems. And so when we try and close the loop and not throw away things, it is much more like a natural system that can work in perpetuity. So these are just a couple examples of the way we tend to think as a culture and what we need to transition to in terms of how we understand the world to work. So another factor is, I feel like I'm just one of a gazillion people, and what I do doesn't matter. And then, we also hear other, other sources say, well, it doesn't matter what we do if China is doing that. So there are all of these messages we get that our little activities aren't going to make a difference. And people are not motivated to act when they don't think that they're going to be successful or make a difference. So what we can do to counteract that, next slide, is show people that they're not alone. And so, if you can say something like, 70% of Americans believe in climate change, that's a powerful message for people to be motivated to do something about it. So talking about how many people do something or what the percentage of people who do something can help people feel, back to that idea of belonging. People don't want to be too different than what the group's doing, otherwise they might be rejected. So it's important to remind people of, maybe their impact as an individual isn't enormous, but they're part of a movement that is making a difference. For a while, people were concerned that when you're trying new things and very few people are doing them, you wouldn't be able to have that normative information to say, more than half of people are doing it this way. But what we found is that dynamic norms are just as valuable. So dynamic norms are talking about how much people have changed. So you can say there's been a 70% increase in the number of people who do this in the last year, or there's been a 250% increase. So you can help people see that there is momentum, and that can be really motivational. All right, next slide, please. Alexis had mentioned goal setting, and there are some details about goal setting that are really important to remember. And one is that a good goal is going to be very specific. It's going to say things like change out 10 light bulbs in your house, or if your house isn't enormous, then a challenging goal might be change all of your light bulbs. But it's important to recognize that if things are too challenging for people, they won't feel efficacy and they won't feel motivated. So asking people some details about their specific situation can help them create specific challenging goals. Now, you can actually get people to respond to really challenging goals, but they have to have all of the resources and support that are available in order to do that. So for instance, if there's a really great some sort of incentive that's in place that would half the amount of money that it would require to insulate your house or something like that, that's when you can set the challenge high, is when it's going to be a financially viable thing for them to do, and it won't take too much time, or if it does take too much time, there are resources to support that. Secondly, people need feedback. The whole idea with goal setting is that you're asking people to get to this new place from an old place, and that there's a period of time where they're making progress. If they don't know what their progress looks like, they don't know how close or far they are from their goal, they can lose the motivation. So it's really important for people to keep track of, like, how have I been doing? My goal was to change a light bulb a week. All right, sometimes taking notes can help people see the progress they're making, or we know that meters help people understand their electricity use, and so on and so forth. So it's really important to provide people both with the information about how close they're getting to their goal, and also, next slide, help them feel good about it. It is really important not only to provide information, but to provide normative feedback, which is like, is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? Is this acceptable or is it unacceptable? We know that people don't want to be too different. So if they're already saving a lot of electricity and you give them information about what everybody else is doing, they can actually go the wrong direction and increase their energy use, unless you say, hey, you're already better than normal and this is great, we need more people like you. Helps them sort of maintain their high level of behavior. All right, next slide, please. So habits are, and Kristen, how am I doing for time?
We're a little bit behind schedule, but I would say if we could wrap it up in the next 3 to 5 minutes and then have a couple questions.
Great, super. So habits are a huge barrier to behavior because they're really an association between a situation and our action. And when a situation and action has been rewarded, then we we respond the next time we're in a situation with that same action. And so habits are built over time, and they're super strong to the point where we actually don't know we're even behaving, which is the reason why they're super hard to break. Because most of the time when we are habitually behaving, we don't even know we're doing it. We don't know that the situation has cued us. And so we're already mid-behavior before we realize, I'm doing the thing I don't want to do. You probably have all had this experience with bringing your own bags to the grocery store. You're like, I wanted to bring my own bags. I had my bags ready, and dang it, here I am without my bags, right? Because you head to the grocery store without queuing up, like, what do I need to do in order to make this happen? So next slide, please. So one of the best places to help people not be hampered by habits is to help them make behavior strategies when they're already changing for some other reason. You know, their family is changing in some way, their education, they're moving, you know, our life is often in flux, and those are the best times to integrate new behaviors. Now, there are strategies for breaking habits as well, and mostly those come in the form of prompts where, like, before you even leave your house, you're prompted to do the preparatory things that you need in order to behave properly. So next, and then I guess just briefly, we know that nature is important to us for a couple of reasons. One is we value the things that we love, and nature is it's again evolutionarily important to us. We evolved in nature, and so it feels very good for the most part, unless you're being chased by a bear or something. But most of the times, it is really important for our mental health. And especially when you're stressed out and when you're feeling bad about things, it can be very valuable to be refreshed through nature, but it also reminds us of why it's important to us. Let's go forward a little bit more. Okay, so just this is a good slide. It is important for us to continue to bring our own bags to the grocery store and ride our bikes and that kind of thing. But our impact as individuals is going to be largest when we make a change in our organizations, or we make a change in our social networks, or we make a change that has to do with our political situation in some way. And so if we can help people maintain their private sphere behaviors, but also expand their organizational behavior, it will make a bigger difference faster. And so one more slide and we can wrap up. Actually, flip it again, please. All right, so there is a theory about the diffusion of innovation, and an innovation can be information, or it can be purchasing a car, or it can be something super even wilder than that. But the idea is that an innovator doesn't necessarily have a big social network that will spread the idea, but early adopters, people who are willing to try new stuff and have a larger social network, can spread an idea faster. And of course, I've mentioned before, you can spread an idea by being obvious about it, and also by giving positive feedback to other people who are trying it. And once people who adopt something early, who have large networks, spread the idea to their own networks, it is like a tsunami, and it can take over in a large social group, like a neighborhood. So we can go on forever and ever, but let's take some questions.
Yeah, I saw one question in the chat from Leslie. Do social norms help to overcome higher barriers?
Alexis, feel free to hop in if you have a response, but I would say that yes, social information is can help with all of the different types of combinations of barriers and benefits, and yet for something that's super difficult, it's not enough. You probably have to combine social information with other sorts of incentives or resources.
Yes, I agree with that. And for high barriers to overcome those, some of the strategies, if you have low benefits, might be competitions or incentives, like Emma was talking about with the half off for your in-home insulation. Or if the benefits are very high, you could get away with convenience or helping people make commitments.
And I don't see any other questions in the chat, but Maggie, no one has their hand raised.
Not that I can tell.
All right. Well, maybe that means people are ready to jump into breakout rooms. Thank you, Dr. Emil, for your presentation. I don't know if both you and Alexis can stay and join. Well, Alexis, you'll be in a breakout room. Dr. Emil, you'll be in one too. And if anyone wants contact information, feel free to let me know and I can share that with you if you have follow-up questions for either of our presenters. Oh, we're not ready for breakout rooms. Forgot our own agenda. We're jumping in to a couple more presentations, a little bit more city-specific examples of what's going on in Minnesota cities. So with that, we will hear from Dave in Faribault.
Thank you, Kristen. I'll go ahead and give you a brief update on some of the energy-related work that we've done in Faribault. And where time permits, I'll try to get some of the tips in that we just heard from Alexis and Elise. They've had some excellent background here. And as time permits, as I said, I'll try to tie that in as well. By way of background, in Faribault, we're in the Xcel Energy territory as well as Steel-Waseca territory. We do participate in Xcel's Partners in Energy program, and much of our work really flows out of that program. If you're not in Xcel territory, you can still do this similar work with your utility, or you can do it on your own with the help of many other organizations, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. So in 2018, we conducted a business blitz through the Partners in Energy program with the help of CERTS and Alexis in particular. So Alexis and three of her colleagues teamed up with us to visit 92 businesses and provide them with information on energy efficiency and opportunities. Based on those visits, we had 20 follow-up activities, including things like upgrading refrigeration systems, which is one of the things we concentrated on, as well as lighting and rooftop units. One thing I will say about this, Alexis and the search team were extremely organized and did a very, very good job of getting the information out, as well as follow-ups. And so it was really helpful for us. It was also super helpful to go out in pairs. So each CERT team member went with a local representative, and that was really helpful because CERTs provided the expertise, the local people provided, the connection to the local businesses, and we were able to really begin to build some strong relationships. In fact, I would say one of our council members who was not overly excited about any of this work that we're doing at the time, we did visit her, and she went ahead and had follow-up visits with refrigeration, and then we were able to actually do a front page article in the newspaper, local newspaper, on the visit and the savings and so on. So it really helped build some strong relationships, which was great. It's something I would strongly recommend, is this business blitz approach. Next slide. Just yesterday, we held a webinar for energy efficiency in construction. So I've noticed that a lot of our developers, as they come to me and they're interested in doing development, I ask them early on about how they're dealing with energy. And a number of them are not aware of all the programs out there. So we held a webinar. We teamed with Northfield and Xcel Energy on this, and Chris Coles of Xcel presented some information on the programs for energy design assistance. And then we also had a local case study where we had Matt Yetzer of MWF Properties and Kent Simon of Miller Hansen Architects present a case study on how they went through this program and how they're saving money. And hopefully now with, getting this message out, people will begin to see the value of these programs, and some of our local developers and others will begin to apply this more readily. Next slide. So in 2017, we had an energy business breakfast or an energy breakfast for commercial and industrial sites. We also included public institutional users, just, users that were using a large amount of energy. And Daikin Applied, one of our large industries, hosted this event, and they presented some information about all the things that they're doing to save money, which was really quite substantial. And we also had Jenny O Turkey Store present some of their information, and Excel and others talked about things that they can do with this. And again, we tried to make it a simple energy breakfast and not be too time consuming with it. And the connections that we made were really important. I think it helped spur some discussion between industries that, gosh, we should continue these kinds of discussions. So next slide. We actually then, at the city, we initiated a sustainable industries cohort where we decided to get together on a regular basis over a lunch hour, where we got industries and others interested in talking about energy and sustainability issues. We would meet at the various industries over the lunch hour. They would generally host, with lunch, and then give us tours of the building and talk their place and talk about the different work that they're doing. We've done a number of things, like it tried to address transportation initiatives and bring people together to say, how can we team on ride shares and buses and all sorts of things. We're going to be having some talks on microgrids and backup energy systems and so on. So it's been a really wonderful thing. I would say that also a lot of our major industries are international companies, and they have these strong beliefs about sustainability, and they have it written into their corporate reports and so on. So they've been extremely important in terms of leading some of the work that we're doing with sustainability and energy. And to the point of even when we adopted our energy action plan, rather than my presenting that to the council, I had representatives from the major industries come in and talk about why it was important to adopt this plan, why they're doing the similar kind of work and so on. So it's lended a tremendous amount of credibility to that. Next slide. We also have done a lot of home energy squad visits. One of the things that I do want to say, and we do have a webinar tomorrow on home energy squads and trying to get people signed up for that. One of our success stories is the work that we've done with Cannon River Manufactured Home Community. We really, we worked with Growing Up Healthy, and they're a nonprofit that has done a super job of being a trusted messenger. So Cannon River Manufactured Home, English is a second language, and many people don't speak English and are low income, so they qualify for free home energy squad visits. And it's just been a super heartwarming, successful story of bringing people together. And out of that, a number of things have grown. We've done things like Red Cross has donated smoke alarms, for example, and we've got those installed in places where they never had any. We've done things like heat tape, which has reduced the amount of water getting used because of frozen pipes and so on. It's just really been a wonderful success story. And next slide. And then finally, I just will end up with saying that we've been very fortunate, and we've had CERTS grants, MPCA grants, the work, we've had help from MinTap, GreenStep Cities, just so many different things to help from so many people to do things. So for example, one of our grants was to do energy retrofits in historic buildings, where we promoted through work sessions and a video on how that could happen. We've had solar feasibility plans that have really reaped many rewards, and climate change plans and so on. So those are just a few of the things that we've worked on with energy related projects in Faribault. And we're just super grateful to all of the support we get from others. We just would not be able to do this without their help. So, and with that, I'll turn it back to Kristen.
Thanks so much, Dave. That's really helpful. And there's so many, great things coming out of Faribault and the work that you guys are doing. So thank you for sharing that. Let's jump over to Jack in Richfield. And if we have any quick questions for either Dave or Jack, feel free to put those in the chat box. So Jack.
Hi, I'm here to talk about really street infrastructure and a program the City of Richfield has implemented. And what you see here is a couple of the registered trademarks of our branding. And I think it's what hopefully you're about to hear. Sweet Streets creating better roads creates better Richfield. And so let me take you through, next slide, what we're talking about. So I used your steps. For us to start at the top, that's our outcome. And it's pretty lofty, but it's what we had, the experience and the quality of life of its citizens. So that's the better streets, better Richfield. The meat is going to be our process and implementation. But before we did that, we had extensive visioning and planning. Next slide, I'll talk about that now. So in the visioning on the left side, the guiding principles, what we did, we took all of our citizens' commissions and had a work session or 3 that worked on a 50-year vision for the city of Richfield. And this is the outcome, and it was ranked in order of priority. So you see what came out was multimodal design was #1 for 50 year to be where we want to be. So we built from the council and all of the commissions a vision of where we're going. On the right side, you see our bicycle master plan. And the key to that was that it was based on origin and destination. So every school, park, commercial district, and these were then simply routes. We didn't focus on what it was about the routes, people doing things. So we took it away from the technical and we just made it a more easy to understand mission that we were on for bicycling. Now, when we get to our pedestrian, on the bottom is our pedestrian master plan. This is, again, not focused on where there are sidewalks. It's focused on who are the people, and it uses the social economic information and destinations, and it cross-references. So you'll see the hotspots in this heat map. Right in the upper center, you see a very dark area. Richfield has built some senior high rises, and it's allowed residents to move out of their home into these senior high rises. So you start to see the senior factor. We also have areas of social economic disparity, and you'll see other parts of the city that start to show up red. So our pedestrian master plan is all about the people that we're trying to serve, and that drives the need, the demand. Next slide. So here's a couple of things that we do when we get into our process and implementation. On the left, and I'm going to jump out and make a claim that Richfield is probably the only city that has an empowered transportation commission. When I say that, it's hard to read on the screen, I'm sure, but staff does not make a recommendation to council on a project. Staff educates the commission, their citizens, they have the vision of the community in mind, and they make the recommendation to council what the project should be. And so they are truly empowered. All the slide is saying is that we engage them up front, we give them the technical analysis, and we go through our open house and we feed it back through them so that they can be comfortable that we're on track to those loftier goals and that the 50-year vision is going to be achieved. On the right is a slide you probably all have seen some version of. I try to use the document from AAA about safe speeds and injuries for pedestrians and bicyclists. And we all know that it's bad. and our basic speed limits on streets, 30 miles an hour is bad. So hopefully it's the story. So we're trying to build in this implementation the facts of why we needed, move forward. So next slide. Then when we get in, this is more of on our technical side, but on the left, again, this is going to be in a ranked priority order. That when we take a project, we step through the critiquing from all the project development, that are we thinking we're on track for the guiding principles, equity? What's our impacts to the environmental? And this is in order. So believe me, it's really difficult to have conversations with some engineers because we haven't even talked about anything yet. Then we start with pedestrians and then they're going nuts. What do you mean? What about? But see, we invert the decision-making because this is what's going to get us to the end that we're trying to achieve. So with the county and MnDOT, this becomes a big fight, but we hold true because we've had success. We'll show in a second. On the right is kind of an expanded technical analysis of what a pedestrian mode should be considering, from the ADA all the way down to shade and resting areas, garbage cans, offset to traffic, medians, all that good stuff. Next slide. And so now I'm going to talk about some of the changes we've made. On the left side, if you can picture a 4-lane undivided, pretty much like a runway. And that's the outcome of a project on a county road where you see hopefully significant changes. On the outside, by the way, you see that there's no change of alignment. It's all straight, follows the property line. But we pushed inwards towards the vehicles to make all our changes. So we got what never existed is offsets with trees and boulevards. County calls it snow storage. The game. How you win. You call it what you want. I'm all about pedestrian. But then the medians, and you see traffic has to meander around, and driver awareness, speed, all those measurements start to come in. On the right side, the extreme right, that's Wayne. When that street had opened up, he lives on that street, and he talked about the freedom he's now been given to move about. That's what we're driving after. There's a bunch of high school kids, and then we integrated with our Arts Commission. And we have a program across the city now where they solicit local poets. It's all done by them. And we etch in the selected poems around the city. Next slide. And again, the fundamentals. So you see on the upper left, the cycle track, offset from traffic. Below that, you see how the cycle tracks are separate crosswalk markings that signalize intersections. Heavy transit use in Richfield. On the upper right, the 515 is high frequency, comes by every 15 minutes. You don't need a schedule. But better bus stops, all of that are built into the roadway design. And yes, Richfield can't go through without saying roundabouts. But anyway, there's a bench and you just randomly think who would ever want to. But I saw them there and I asked if I could take their picture. Next slide. More of the same. People moving about the community. Again, it's not necessarily the big commuter bike that's our focus. So people walking, we do a pit stop. We have been doing pre-COVID pit stops for bike to work day. Safer crossings, we've been using a series of flashing lights, push button by the user. That crosswalk in the right actually has in pavement flashing lights. So not only do the lights flash, the pavement flashes. And bottom right is a walk to school. What is that? A school bus. Next slide. And so what are the outcomes? So randomly, when somebody links to a City Pages article about best suburb, and it happens to be called Richfield. We didn't solicit such thing, but I mean, what's it mean? I don't know, but I'm just telling you, somebody wrote that article. Next slide, I think, kind of wraps it up. It's another form of our branding. And so I'll just floated out there, our Sweet Streets program, do you think we've created through better roads a better Richfield? Because that's what our mission has been for over a decade now. I think we've been pretty happy with the results as we've seen them.
Thank you, Jack. I love hearing Richfield's story and all of the great work that's gone into transportation and streets projects. I think, honestly, you should market this as tourism. I'm a biker and I want to come bring my bike and bike in your city. So I'll come visit. Maybe not right now. It's kind of gross out, but I had to turn off. Go ahead.
Quickly, COVID, I had a lot of people from Richfield, because nobody's going to work, realize the difference of the boundaries of the city now. They jump on their bike and go for a ride, and then they would realize they hit the city border and go, oh.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Were there any questions for Dave or Jack before we jump into breakout rooms? Thanks, Rachel. Your streets are plowed. I'll come on over.
The great news that both Richfield and Faribault have new sustainability commissions with a combination of business people and city council people, residents. So they're moving ahead with, and then the Richfield Transportation Commission is an amazing example too.
Definitely true. Well, I'm not seeing any questions. Go ahead.
Real quick, Jack, you've probably done such a service to the surrounding communities by taking the lead, because those surrounding communities are going to now want to have what Richfield has, and it's going to grease the wheels for them to be able to do similar work. So very good work on being a leader in this.
Thank you, and that's true. Hennepin County and Bloomington had a corridor, and the first open house, what people thought should be done, and the strongest comment was just like you did in Richfield. So you're right, that's true.
We did want to bring everyone back for just a few final slides to talk a little bit more specifically about best practice number 24, which you'll see integrates some of the conversations and topics that we've talked about today. And so I'm going to share my screen and we'll have Sean go into those slides. Sean, we do have a little less time than we had previously anticipated. So
just hello, everybody. I'm the GreenStep City Best Practice Advisor for number 24. So if you're working on strengthening your green team with your staff and commissions, give me a call and we can figure out ways to help move things forward in an easy way. You can click on my little link there to schedule a time to meet up. And then we're also, we're getting environmental commissions together to also share what they're working on. Okay, next slide. And so one of the things we've learning today is that having community support is really important for the Sustainability Commission to have momentum, for the staff to feel support to work on things, and for the city council to see that they can move ahead. So another thing that I can help you with is mapping out assets in your community that you want to mobilize. Okay, next step. And so this picture here is of Tim Santry from the Bloomington Sustainability Commission, talking with environmental commission leaders from 14 Hennepin County cities. So Tim sponsored our first statewide environmental commissions conference for the commissions to share what they're working on, share their behavior change campaigns. And now with our new Resilient Cities and Communities Network, we're going to be having regular meetings with, about 4 times a year within each county. So like the East Metro cities, West Metro cities, South Metro. And we're very excited about Greater Minnesota cities participating as well. I wanted to point out, if you go to the Best Practice 24 page, you'll see a ton of resources on how to strengthen your green team as well. Okay, next step, next slide. And another key idea with many of the cities have adopted new comprehensive plans. So make sure to move those plans forward. And then in terms of trying to track how your progress is doing, it's a lot easier in the Metro because the Met Council will be giving cities annual updates on the resilience indicators. We're looking for ways of doing that in Greater Minnesota. And then a great example is Bloomington Sustainability Commission meets with their city council every year to coordinate on their work plan to make sure they're helping to move things ahead that are important in Bloomington's comprehensive plan. Okay, next step. And so the other exciting thing is for how to learn how to do better behavior change campaigns. You can share ideas with other cities in your area through our networking with sustainability commissions. Also within the Partners in Energy, they have a way for cities to learn together through their networking office hours. So that's a great resource as well. And search is totally amazing, as you heard. And then the next slide here. In terms of doing a community-wide visioning effort, Richfield's example of having a big community-wide vision that fits things together is really helpful. And so that was like, it showed like how easy it was to get their bike and pedestrian work happening after you did the initial visioning. Another thing is cities are working on integrating equity into their visioning. So with our Resilient Cities and Communities Coalition, local elected leaders of color are creating a network to support one another. There's some other great equity resources on the GreenStep Cities webpage related to the Equity in Action Toolkit from the Sustainable States Network. Another idea for you, if you're looking at creating a climate action plan, don't forget that you can also create a short-term, like 1 to 3 year work plan that can help you get immediate things you can get done. And then in Southern Minnesota, the cities have been teaming up with their county and the PCA to look at how to be prepared for the big rain events down there. So that's a great kudos to PCA, Region 9, and the EPA for supporting that. Okay, next one. And then as we've heard, there is the new GreenStep Schools program. And so Joni would love to help your city tie in with GreenStep Schools. For a student environmental commissioner, many cities are now having high schoolers on their environmental commissions that can help get the youth voice to move forward. And then many of our sustainability commissions are, and local groups like the Minnetonka Climate Initiative have youth and adults working together. So if you need any guidance on how to set up a good way for getting students to join your environmental commission, you can give me a call. We're going to be having a new network of all the student environmental commissioners across the state to learn from each other. Climate Generation is now moving ahead with the helping mentor students that want to make a difference, building upon the momentum from I Matter. And then for your college graduates that are just graduating and want to come back to their hometown to help out, you could apply to get funding from the Lead for America to have a fellowship for a recent college grad to work in your city to advance resilience and equity. I think that's all my slides here. And then I put my contact info in the chat box. So please click on my link there to schedule a time to meet with me. And all these resources are in my PDF of the handout I put in the chat box too.
Thanks, Sean. I just wanted to reiterate that, today we were talking about behavior change programs, whether or not they're within your own city staff efforts, or if it's broader with residents or businesses in your community. Any campaigns or programs that you're developing around that would fit best under 24.4, and there are additional resources when you go and explore that best practice. So just to point that out. And then just to wrap things up, our next workshop's coming up, timely for most of Minnesota. On November 4th, we're talking smart salting. It's actually a new property management certificate training that the PCA, Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, coordinates. So you actually get a certificate at the end of the training. It is going to be longer than our normal workshop time, so do pay attention to that. And it's also on a different day than our normal workshop time. So on November 4th, and then the one after that on November 18th, we'll be talking about strategies and approaches to reduce energy burdens on residents in your community. So you can go to eventbrite.com and just search the events bar for GreenStep Cities, and you'll see all of our workshops listed right there, and you can RSVP, all free and all open to everyone. So please share with anyone else that might be interested. And with that, we're right on time. I'm sorry we didn't have too much time for additional questions with the whole group, but do feel free to contact any of us or our presenters directly with anything that you might have. And we look forward to seeing you at a future workshop. Thank you, everyone.